Ich möchte Deutschschrift sprechen, damit mein Sohn nicht versteht. Hier liegt mein Sohn an dem...
I want to speak German so that my son doesn't understand what I'm saying. This is my son Andrei. He's only 16 years old. Please help us. If no one helps him now, he will never get well again. They won't treat him at the hospital for adults. They told me there that he would definitely die. He can still be saved. I appeal to you, to all the German people, help my child. Don't let him die.
Das ganze deutsche Volk. Helfen Sie meinem Kind. Lassen Sie ihn nicht sterben.
It is the children who suffer most from the horrors of a disaster. And it's no different in Chernobyl. But here, the horror continues, and will continue for a long time to come. Infected by radiation, poisoned by contaminated food, sick from nuclear fallout. Children in Minsk. Clinic number 1. The very worst cases. Their chances of recovery are around 15%. There is no money, no equipment, no expertise. Too few people are interested. In Russia, many want to forget the disaster altogether. In the West too. Parents, children in critical condition, simply abandoned. It was the plight of the children that prompted us to make this journey and follow this trail of horror. Chudiani, 300 kilometers southeast of Minsk, near Gomel, 200 kilometers from Chernobyl. Radiation chemist Alexander Ruchla measures the radiation at the entrance to the village. Natural background radiation is about 0.5 microsievert per hour. The level here is 86 microsieverts per hour. Here, it is 170 times higher. Back in 1986, the clouds of deadly radioactive dust were carried further by the wind. Here, it rained down, brought sickness, and drove the people away. Later, the people simply couldn't understand why they were being evacuated. You can't taste radioactivity or smell it. You can't feel it. You can only measure it. Houses which will remain empty for a long time. Yet more and more people are returning. Secretly, like in the war, says a 70-year-old woman who remained. She was rehoused a long time ago, she says. The others are content, but not her. There are many people still living here. Even the old man over there at the back has returned to his home. There's another village too, heavily contaminated. An old man is still living there, in Malinoka. Malinoka, 5 kilometers further. Ground contamination is over 100 curies per square kilometer. After the explosion in Bavaria, in the most badly affected area, it was 2 curies. There was uproar in West Germany at the time. Here, there are levels equivalent to the most badly hit area in Germany at the time of the accident, multiplied by 50. The real horror of radioactivity is the silence which accompanies it. You can't smell it. You can't taste it. You can't hear it. It's silent. There are no shouting children, no barking dogs, only the scientist's measuring instrument. It's as if life itself had abandoned the place. When Yevgeny Petrayev, professor at the University of Minsk, was asked by the president of the Academy of Sciences immediately after the disaster what could be done, he replied, "Build factories for barbed wire, fence off the entire region, move the people somewhere else." Since that time, he has been responsible for the measurements in Belarus. He talked about it, and his face hardened. Soil samples from all over the country are piling up at his institute. What is lying around here, unprotected, is highly contaminated. His colleagues are falling sick. The laboratory still works under the same primitive conditions as on that first day. The Republic has no money, and there are too many problems. There are no automatic measuring instruments, either in Belarus or in the Ukraine. The people here say that someone has to do the work. Someone has to sacrifice himself. Without measurements, others cannot be protected. Prior to 1990, they took measurements from an aircraft. That, says Petrayev, is like taking the average temperature of all the patients in a hospital. It's the reason why the laboratory is filling up with sacks of soil and samples. Samples taken just 5 meters apart can give completely different readings. "70 kilometers from the reactor, Cheuniki cemetery. The fields around it are being used for farming, in spite of contamination levels of more than 10 curies per square kilometer. That's 5 times higher than the highest level recorded in Germany at the most critical period. Cheuniki, the last town before the strict control zone, as the White Russians call the restricted area. The town is emptying. More than half the former population of 47,000 have gone. Many, especially the younger ones, will follow. Lenin is soon going to find himself alone in front of the town hall. The majority of those leaving are families with young children, says the mayor. The people are afraid of contamination and sickness. He has been living in the town for 40 years. He wants to stay, not just because of his post, but also for personal reasons. Cheuniki Hospital. They need another 25 doctors and about 50 nurses. They don't even mention equipment and drugs. The children of Cheuniki. This girl is 15. Her growth is stunted. The reason? Contaminated food. These are the mild cases, the beginnings of the sickness. When the pain gets worse, the children are sent to the big clinics in Minsk. It reduces the work, and the statistics look better. This woman from Cheuniki was sent to Minsk. Her child is sick. It's his thyroid gland, says the mother. Her child is being treated here in Minsk. Asked if she believes it's the result of Chernobyl, she says yes. A lot of our children are sick. Farm produce rarely came from far away. They usually grew their own food. This is where they sold and harvested. It's what they lived on. Farming being carried on right in front of the restricted area. Contamination around 40 curies per square kilometre, 20 times higher than the levels recorded in Germany in 1986. Food produced here is sent throughout the Republic. The start of the restricted area, the 50-kilometre boundary, the strict control zone. The scientists here call it Radiation Park. A huge laboratory guarded by soldiers, with access given only to a special few. It will be another 300 years before this region can be inhabited again, at a rough estimate. By Western standards, 2/3 of Belarus is completely uninhabitable. Here, 38 kilometers from the reactor, more readings. This time, we have 910 microsieverts per hour. That's 1,800 times higher than natural background radiation. After the disaster, the authorities built fences, set up restricted areas. The 30-kilometer area was abandoned after just 4 weeks. There was hardly any difference between the level of ground poisoning outside the restricted area and that within. Since then, the fence has been superfluous, a sign of the nervousness of those responsible. Here, another fence, the first one they built. At that time, the power station disaster was still being referred to officially as an accident, a malfunction. They thought 20 kilometers would be enough. 14 days later, they put up the barbed wire, but it was already pointless. Measurements being taken now at the entrance to the town of Borshovka, 13 kilometers from the reactor. The new reading, 989 microsieverts per hour. That's natural background radiation times 2,000. Scientists have observed changes in the plants here for many years. Corn, for example, reveals abnormal growth. The same thing is observed on American nuclear test sites. Laboratory conditions, however, are better in Radiation Park. There are no soldiers, no tourists, and no former inhabitants. The area is restricted, devoid of people. It used to be the breadbasket of the Soviet Union. The fences did not stop looters from plundering the houses, and there have been contaminated household goods being sold on the markets ever since. There's virtually no way of recognizing the danger. There are simply not enough measuring instruments in Belarus and the Ukraine. The houses were abandoned years ago. The schoolhouse in Borshovka. Never again will children have lessons here. At midday, the army came with their lorries. The people were taken from the streets, from the houses, from the fields. They were not allowed to take anything with them. That was 14 days after the disaster. They hadn't been told of the danger. Signs of a hurried departure. Then came the so-called liquidators, soldiers with orders to get rid of everything, most of them young men, also scientists and doctors. They were still determined to conceal the extent of the disaster. Dr. Chusnov, himself sick from radiation poisoning, and today a pediatrician in Minsk, was one of those employed as a liquidator. He says, there are a lot of people who will die as a result of this work. He also has friends who became sick and will soon die. He says there were 600,000 liquidators. Her husband was a liquidator, 27 years old. Her husband is not well. He is now an invalid because of Chernobyl. He was healthy before, but then he developed a back disorder, and now his legs are also giving him problems. Sasha, 6 years old. Alexandra, 5 years old. But children are not the only ones affected.
Der ist Liquidator seit 87, arbeitet er da. Wird hier untersucht, allgemein untersucht.
Workers from the Chernobyl nuclear power station in hospital.
Der ist kein Liquidator, der arbeitet hier als Bauarbeiter in der Stadt.
Seit wann arbeitet er?
С какого времени вы работаете? С 86-го. 86.
On the 26th of April, he was with the firefighters. He doesn't feel too good, he says.
Kann er mal erzählen, was ihm so passiert ist, so ganz kurz?
Как вы себя чувствуете, может, в двух словах скажете?
Посредственно.
So mittelmäßig, meine ich.
20 kilometers from the town of Chernobyl, another 32 kilometers to the reactor. In the Republic of the Ukraine, another halt. This time, the gates to the power station. Inside the restricted area now, There are more people here. After all, the power station is still connected to the grid. It needs workers. The cars we have come in have to stay behind. All cars inside the restricted area are identified with the word sonar to prevent contamination being carried any further. A helpless attempt to master the problem. Chernobyl could be a perfectly normal Ukrainian town if the streets were not so empty. "30,000 people used to live here. Women and children, old folk, and of course the local priest. All those who didn't work in the nuclear power station were evacuated, taken out of the zone. There are now 4,000 left, they say, and they stay behind mainly to ensure that the costly power station still has an operating crew, firefighters, and of course security personnel. The contamination level in and around the town has reached the 40 mark. In the long term, that means death for those living here. It's the reason why the people are sent away every 14 days, and 14 days later, they return. Meanwhile, the small houses are being pulled down, so that the contamination stays underground, say our guides. Or to be more accurate, so that no one can come back again. Chernobyl will disappear from the map. The river Dnieper and the so-called dead fleet. Readings of up to 80 curies were taken on board, 40 times higher than levels recorded in Germany at the time of the disaster. They can't be scrapped. If they remain where they are, they will contaminate the water. This river supplies Kiev with its drinking water. There are millions of people still living in this region. Distance to the power station, 10 kilometers. The river Draginka, 4 kilometers from the reactor. There are 10,000 curies of strontium in the silt. This level is 1 million times higher than the already generous Russian limit. Comparisons with Germany are no longer possible. The leaves were falling even in the first night. The conifers survived, but the radioactivity is stored up inside. Level 500 curies. Distance to the reactor 3 kilometers. It is forbidden to leave the road. It could cost you your life. The old villages were bulldozed so that no one can creep back. The town of Pripyat, previously 30,000 inhabitants, now none. The evacuation took an entire week. Levels here 500 to 1,000 curies. Distance to the reactor 1 kilometer. This town will not be found on future maps. Distance to the reactor 0. The side walls were reinforced with concrete at great human cost. The roof of the damaged building was capped with 6 millimeters of lead. This fragile covering was supposed to keep the radioactive debris inside in check and provide protection. Radiation is causing the concrete to rust and crumble. The assumed safety blanket provided by the protective measures is failing. Since the summer, the temperature has stabilized at 200 degrees centigrade, but the reactor is still burning. Next to it, in units 1 to 3, there are 4,000 people working. The reactor type is the same, an RBMK 1000. And now the reinforced concrete of the sarcophagus in which it was entombed is rusting. 2,000 square meters of its surface are defective. Inside, there is radioactive material. Levels are soaring. Comparisons of levels have no meaning. Just a few minutes on the roof means sickness. A longer stay means death. Meanwhile, the workers carry on with their shifts as usual.
Поэтому сейчас рассматривается два варианта. Один вариант, который мы уже обсуждали, это вот создание...
Professor Petraev talks about the latest ideas for sealing off the leaks. The first suggestion is for a second sarcophagus to be built over the old one, although no one knows if it will last any longer than the first. The second suggestion is to fill up the inside of the core with concrete, producing a monolith. But no one knows how damp concrete reacts to heat. Inside, everything is normal. The machine room for units 1 and 2. If you did not know about the danger, you would not think of it in here. The control room of Unit 3. Radioactive debris lies close by. Each of the reactors had one of these control rooms. Incompetence, overconfidence, and faulty design caused the reactor to collapse. Officials later called it human error. We are now approaching the end of our journey. On our left, a concrete wall 10 meters thick. Behind it, the former boiler. Now just a tangle of debris, scrap metal and radioactive fuel elements. On a human timescale, it will never stop burning. We have arrived. Here, at 1:26 a.m. on the 26th of April 1986, Valery Ilyich died, the first victim of the Chernobyl disaster. There are no statistics on the number of dead. They say 80,000. So far, every day there are more.